Okay. We're back with another segment on hospitality with Thomas. Thomas spent time in Spanish Fork, Utah, greeting guests. I was able to watch and observe his humility, his special predilection for making people welcome when they come to the temple for the first time. I also have a soft spot for hospitality as well. And so it was inevitable, I think, that we get together on a Zoom call, bounce ideas and realizations off of each other, and hope that these will inspire devotees to go to the next level in terms of giving first-time comers to the temple a memorable and unique experience. So thank you for being the example of hospitality and graciousness that you are. Thank you for joining us today, Thomas. You mentioned honoring guests. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, the first thing I mean is when a guest comes in, first of all, I should say what my mood should be. And my mood in the morning when I was living at Spanish Fork Temple was, Krishna, please send people here today, and I vow that I'm going to do my very best to welcome them with joy and attentiveness. And if we present ourselves as available to Krishna, then he gives us the ability. I'm confident then, beginning that day, that he has people in mind he's going to send, and hopefully he has some degree of confidence that I want to serve him and I want to welcome those same guests. So that's the interior mood that I hope to have. And then it can be something very simple, that when a guest enters our temple, sometimes they're going to enter, for example, at Spanish Fork Temple, into the gift shop or into the restaurant. So one small thing I always do is I stand up when I see them enter. And then I move towards them not gently, but not aggressively, with the biggest smile that I can muster, the biggest genuine smile. And that little action is a physical cue to them. You're important. I love that spiritual principle we talked about in our last session, that the guest is God. And that's the mood we should have. This is an incredible honor because I've been put in a place where I get to welcome Krishna, seated in the heart of this soul, into Krishna's temple. And so just that one little action can be a helpful way just to remind ourselves and the person that we're greeting that this is a very important person. This is a VIP.
I never realized how powerful a simple gesture like standing could be until I saw you do it over and over and over again. Consider that in this day and age, people have multiple options of how they can spend their time. There's any number of advertisements to lure them this way or that way. And yet some or other Krishna from within their heart has directed their steps. Some of them have come from hundreds, if not thousands of miles. Some of them have come halfway across the globe. Krishna has done that. Krishna has done what you call the heavy work, the heavy lifting. And if Krishna has motivated that person to come 10 miles, 100 miles, 1,000 miles, their feet have steered them in this direction. The car, the steering wheel. How can we not get up and walk 10 feet to greet them? How can we not? Honestly, I didn't think of this, but when I saw you modeling, I realized that it's just plain rude not to do that.
Yeah, it can appear just to be a very small thing, but it communicates so much, I think, to the other person. And like you said,
we're chanting. I hate to interrupt you, but I think
please.
We're chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, asking Krishna to bring people to us. That's our prayer. We pray that for 2 hours a day, every day of our life. So when Krishna brings someone through the door, sometimes from halfway around the world, you can't stand up and greet them in person. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the heart and soul of what we're all about. We're trying to reconnect every soul back with Krishna again. And they're all on that continuum on a journey back to Krishna. So our role is very simple. When our life intersects their life, we just move them a little bit closer to Krishna. We help Krishna in the work he's already beginning. And like you say, we don't know where they came from. And so it's also helpful after you've greeted them warmly is find out a little bit about the person. What brought them to the temple today? Where have they been coming from? Is this the first time they visited this temple or a temple like this? All of that can really help you see what Krishna has already been doing in this person's life to bring them to this point. And we can use that information to customize the experience we can give them of meeting Krishna in even a deeper way in his house.
I found too that when we do school tours, rather than just give a spiel to the kids, I ask the kids, well, what do you want to know about karma, reincarnation, Virginia? Why don't you steer the conversation? And that's always much more lively. Don't start with me, start with them, where they're at. Don't just spew onto them the lecture you heard this morning on YouTube because it's fresh in your mind. It's going to be much more effective to see what's in their mind. Like you said, where are you coming from? What brought you to the temple? Have you been to any ISKCON temples before? There are any number of questions that one could ask in order to honor and kind of find something to hang your hat on. There are any number of directions you could go as far as preaching, but preaching is not just preaching at somebody. It has to be preaching to a specific individual. And the more we learn where they're at, the more we can reach them. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a personalist movement. So let's learn something about that person, their life, their journey, their experiences, because that's anytime God is in their story, that's a saving story. That's an important story. And sometimes even having those kind of conversations with people awakens within them a new way of seeing their journey up until that point. They might say something like, I just went to an Indian restaurant, or I watched something on YouTube about Indian culture, and it sparked something within me. I thought, wow, that's really interesting. I'd love to learn more. So we're learning about that person, and we're honoring that person by learning about them. So yeah, it's super important. And like you said, what better way to do it when they're in the temple too, instead of always in a posture of imposing or appearing to proselytize. You could have a group of 25 or 30 school kids like you have had in the temple, and just let them look around that space and say, what stands out to you? What do you see here that you'd like to know more about? How wonderful and genuine and natural that kind of conversation is versus a discourse that we want to give them that day.
Yeah, I like to ask them after they've been around a little bit. I like to ask them, do you have any questions about anything you smelled, you saw, you heard, you tasted, or you touched? That gets them thinking,
It's perfect. Yeah. And that's all the elements that are in the arti also. So Krishna is bringing all of our senses to bear in that moment. So especially if they happen to be there right after an arti or during an arti, their senses are going to be engaged with these things, and they're going to want to know what these things mean. Yeah. So our temples are model teaching environments, and especially in Spanish Fork, but really in all of our temples, we've got paintings and pictures and murtis and images that we can just naturally walk through those and tell the Krishna story.
I like to do a little reverse psychology. I like to talk on a personal one-to-one level to the point past where they expect me to preach to them. I like to take it to the point where they actually start getting afraid that I'm not going to tell them anything about Krishna consciousness. And then what happens is they start asking the questions spontaneously. See what I'm saying? That I'm so comfortable in who I am, and I'm comfortable with them. I don't have to foist my religion on someone. My ego has no part of my interaction with them. I don't need to leave my mark on them in terms of preaching or, trying to embed parts of the philosophy in them. But if I can treat them in such an intimate, casual, comfortable way that they're the ones who start asking the questions, then I think it's I think you've really got them kind of in a really good way where you'd like them to be.
Yeah, and like you say, you've done that by creating that mood that I want to learn your story. I want to hear about you. And the most natural response to that is a mood of docility and an openness to hearing. I had a friend that always told me, when you get on an airplane or in a taxi cab or in a car, always ask some. I frame it this way. I say, I tell stories for a living, or I love to hear stories. What's your story? That simple question I've asked hundreds of times, and although people are shocked to be asked it, no one has ever refused me.
Oh, wow.
And what happens is, when you hear their story, there's always a spiritual thread in it you can start to pull. They'll discover it in the telling, many of them the first time they've ever maybe even reflected on their life. They'll start to have these aha moments. Wow, I never realized that thing had to happen for this later thing to happen in my life until now. And then she said, the most natural thing that's going to happen after you've genuinely heard their story, you genuinely listened, is they're going to turn to you and say, very naturally, what's your story? and there's nothing unnatural or forced about it. And that's the same mood you're speaking of in the temple, is when someone is genuinely heard, there's just this opening of the heart to whatever else you want to share with them, because you've shown them that you care about them. It's a trite phrase, but it's so true. No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And when we become witnesses of compassion and hospitality, then we've earned the right to be teachers.
Wow. I've noticed when you did tours in Spanish Fork, you would spend hours sometimes with people. So there must be how do you transition from the point where you've given them what they expected, you've given them more than they expected, you've gone a mile towards them, but to do more, to kind of hang on to them, might then give the opposite impression. It might start turning the tide a little bit. And yet you seem to be able to literally, I want to know, I genuinely asking this because I want to know, because I'm afraid that I'll just go a little bit too far, and then they'll recoil a little bit. I try to leave them hungry, I intentionally don't tell them things so that they get the impression that I don't need to preach to them. I just want to make a comfortable atmosphere. I want to create a connection. And then I know that if I do that and they're destined to get further along in their Krishna conscious path, they'll do that. And so what I do is I give them a taste, but you seem to be a master at giving them a whole meal. And how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, some of it might come from being raised Mormon and then being a Mormon missionary. But I think you have this skill too, Chodu, being attentive to cues from their body and their posture and their eyes and where the inattentiveness to what you're saying might start to wane. It's just really being attentive to the body language that you're being given, that people will let you know, I think, when you're getting to a threshold. And then you can just say, gosh, it's been so wonderful talking with you. And we've got a Sunday program. I'd love to see you again. Feel free to look around at your own leisure. That's one thing I always like to say. Just look around, and if you see stuff that interests you or you have more questions, I'm just going to be downstairs. So they know that there's not what they're expecting is the pitch at the end. And that's what you're saying. don't give the pitch because it leaves them wanting, and it removes that thing they've already got in their mind. Oh, it's coming. It's coming. It's like the used car salesman, you know, they're going to ask for money, or they're going to try to proselytize me or convert me or whatever. You don't do that. You're aware of the cues when the conversation seems to start to wane just a little, or the questions aren't as engaged. And that's where I just say, gosh, take as much time as you like to look around. And I'm still available to you if you'd like to come talk more. And then you give them another landing point. This Sunday, we've got a Sunday feast. It's at 5 o'clock. Please come. I'd love to see you again. It'll give you a nice experience to see in action the things that we've talked about today. Or we've got a festival coming up on Thursday. It's a fun thing for your family to come to learn about Indian culture and a little bit more about our philosophy. So that tends to be my mood. It's just be attentive to the cues. Don't give the hard sell at the end because they're expecting that. That leaves them wanting, like you say, and then give them a landing pad to come back again.
You get an extraordinary high proportion of people who do come back to the Sunday feast. Is there anything additional that you do?
You know, I don't think so. I think hospitality is so fundamentally absent in our larger culture that when people experience kindness and attentiveness, and like you say, give them as much time as we can. And it's not always possible to spend a lot of time. I probably got in trouble there for spending too much time sometimes. But I don't think there has to be anything special. It's so attractive when you're loved by somebody, especially someone that just met you, that makes you feel loved, known, named, and welcomed. They're asking themselves in their heart, what is it about this culture that's creating that kind of a mood? And again, we're being attentive that Krishna has already brought them there. So they're already disposed spiritually. I just always assume that they're looking for something. They're not fully satisfied with whatever religious tradition they're in or the path that they're walking down. That's why they ended up there that day. So if they know that you're not going to give them the hard pitch, and that this is a warm, welcoming community, you've removed the fundamental obstacles to them coming into the temple. And because you've oriented them upstairs in the temple or in whatever sacred space we're in, you've removed all those fears of, am I going to follow the proper etiquette? What's going to happen? What am I going to see when I go in the temple? All that's been taken care of. So it's an easy landing to come to the Sunday feast after that.
I had one more question. Oh, you mentioned name. You mentioned name. Would you consider it important that when you leave them to wander around, you be able to address them by name?
Yeah, so important. And I have a terrible memory, but I try to, once I've learned their name, use it as much as I can in the conversation. I don't know what famous author said it, but they said basically, your name is the sweetest word that you hear, you know, and it immediately makes it personal. It's not accidental in places like the Old Testament that God revealed his name to Moses. There's a certain kind of, what's the word I want to use? There's a certain kind of vulnerability when we share our name with another. There's a giving of your own self to the other. And so you honor that name and you use that name and to try to, at the close of that conversation, to use it again. And because my mind is so old and frail, through the tour, I'm usually repeating their name in my head so I don't forget. You know, I think I sent you a picture of a couple that came here, that the young girl, Cami, had been to the Festival of Colors in Spanish Fork when she was a little girl. And because I said it enough times now, I'll remember Connor and Cami when they come back the next time. So it just also helps me as a greeter to remind myself, this is a personalist movement. This is a person Krishna sent. This person has a name. And how surprised are they going to be when they come back that I'll remember their name?
That's where I was going to go next. It's my own personal experience that if someone comes a second or even a third time, You may not get their name the second time, but once you've been introduced to them twice and you get it the third time, you've made a friend for life. You've made a supporter for life. I can say I've been in Spanish Fork, Utah since 1980. I was life membership director. Well, I've been in Spanish Fork since 1990 full time, and I was life membership director in Los Angeles through the 80s. I still have most of those people who donated. Still, they still donate to me here in Spanish Fork, Utah, because I used to stand on the front steps of the Culver City Temple, and I used to ask them their names, and I would be able to remember their name 2 or 3 times down the line. And that ingratiated me to them and them to me, to such a point that with most of those people, we are still dear friends now, 45 years later. So I'm glad you mentioned that too. If you can, and some people, they might ask the name on a first meeting or so with no intention really of committing it to memory. And what you said is the determination to remember the name is fulfilled by repeating the name often during the tour. It takes 4 or 5 repetitions to know a name. So if you can do them all in the first visit, then you're very likely to know that name. And another thing you can do is just pick up your phone and take a picture of them. Put them in your contacts with a picture. And you can also write personal details in your phone under the notes section. You can study those, and then you can be cocked and loaded when they come again. Any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great idea, that whole idea of taking a picture too, because when they're there, they're going to want to take a picture. So number one, you're letting them know it's okay to take a picture. And yeah, then you have that as a reference point. Because now what my mind needs to do is associate, after they've left, those names I had repeated with some faces. And then I'll be able to see Connor and Cammie from 75 yards away, and I'm gonna recognize those faces. So taking a picture has a dual advantage. We're doing a service for them because they'll want a family picture, and then we're locking that person into our memory banks, or even, like you said, even better, create a contact on your phone and drop that picture in, and just some of those details you learned about their life that you could quickly review if you needed to, that had brought them to the temple in the first place. So yeah, that's an excellent idea. And we've talked a lot about what we say to them. How we leave them too is so important, to leave them with that, again, sense you're honored and appreciated. We're so happy you came today. It's been a thrill to meet you. I always try to put my hand on my heart, and we hope you'll come back again. So the way we leave them is as important as the way we greeted them in the very beginning.
Is it true to say that even though we worship the deity, and we also have this dual job of receiving guests and increasing the mission, that if someone ignores a guest, or even consciously or unconsciously insults a guest, in favor of having deity worship, or justifies or rationalize that because they're worshiping the deity, isn't that what we call kanista adhikari mentality? They worship the deity, but they don't see that same deity in the hearts of people.
Yeah, and again, it just seems to be an infection that we need to keep fighting off. That those services are somehow separated, or one is more important than the other. Both of them are Krishna longing for an encounter. You could even say that hospitality has the quality of darshan. It's greeting the deity within that stranger, within that visitor, within that person that he's brought there. And he's seen us showing kindness and compassion and hospitality to these souls that are so important to him, that he's done so much to bring them to this point by their mercy. And how pleasing to Krishna that he sees us offer that service to him.
What a wonderful insight. Imagine, you come to the temple, you've taken time and trouble and energy to come to the temple, and you present yourself before Krishna, and Krishna sees you there. He notes the devotion that got you standing in front of him. But imagine Krishna seeing you greet and make welcome a fallen soul who is coming to the temple for the first time. Now, imagine a father. Is he more impressed by a son who honors the father, or would he rather see that son during that same time period helping out another one of his sons? Which would be the way to the father's heart? Directly honoring the father face to face, or helping out another of the father's sons and daughters to come back to home, back to Godhead? That's a really good point that you made, Thomas.
Oh, well, you made it even better. Yeah, we're a chip off the old block. It's how we show that we are extensions of Krishna's love, and how pleasing to him when he sees his own characteristics modeled and extended through our lives to others.
Wonderful. I don't want people to have to, look at long videos. I'd like short, pithy videos.